I'm Deborah Davidson, Director of Catalyst Conversations. This is our 5th program in the Fall 2020 series of Virtual Catalyst, and we're so pleased to be in conversation with Brian Knep. Brian was last with us in 2018 for a program called Something from Nothing with architect and mathematician Andrew Witt, with both a conversation and a podcast. Knep is a media artist whose works range from large-scale interactive installations to microscopic sculptures of nematodes. He had the first artist in residence at Harvard Medical School, working side by side with scientists, using their tools and techniques to explore alternative meanings and ways of connecting to the world. We have been in conversation with Brian a long while as he participated in our very first program, our launch in 2012. One of the reasons I'm so interested in his work is that Brian uses technology to make poetry. Here is a description of one of his well-known works, Healing Pool. It uses custom algorithms to create a glowing pool of organic patterns on the floor. When visitors step across the pool, lay on top of it, or simply touch it, the patterns tear apart and rebuild themselves, but never exactly as before. The project serves as a type of memorial, a constantly evolving record of change that honors the minuscule ways in which the slightest interactions, no matter how small or unintentional, have some impact. It feels as if the pattern is healing a wound, holding a memory of each interaction. We have been asking our participants what they're up to, how and if their respective Catalyst conversations have stayed with them, and what they are dealing with in the current moment. This evening, I am having that conversation with Brian Knep. In contrast to what we normally do, the conversation is between the two of us. Brian is now going to share his work, and we'll have a conversation following that, and you can join in, as Eduardo mentioned, through chat or by raising your hand. Eduardo will be on hand to expedite that. So with that, Brian, the screen share is yours.
Great. Hi, everybody. I just want to say first that it's going to be kind of quick because I want to get to some of the new work. I thought it'd be interesting to talk about some of the work I've been doing lately. And just a little background, which is that I studied computer science and math in school, and I worked on research in a research group for a while. Then I worked in special effects for a while, working for George Lucas. Then I did large-scale installations for educational museums, science museums. And then I started making artwork, and now I kind of split my time. So I do artwork, and then I also consult for companies, mostly exhibit design companies still. And so with that, let me share my screen. All right, is that working?
Yes, let me just mention, Eduardo, I think you need to focus on Brian, not me.
Okay, got it.
Okay, but can you all see a bird?
Yes.
All right. So in doing this talk, looking over my work, I just realized there's a lot of my work sort of has patterns in it, and I'm sort of fascinated by repetition and uniqueness. And so, for example, how do you take birds like this is a European starling, and get this beautiful choreographed behavior. This is a type of pattern, and scientists would call this an emergent behavior. You take these individuals and put many of them together, and you get something quite complex. Similarly, how do you go from something like a neuron, hopefully some of you folks have recognized this, to something as complicated as a brain, and all the patterns in there, and thinking about how do we get our sense of self and our sense of free will, et cetera, and consciousness. Similarly, we look at the patterns on these zebras, and what I find fascinating is that no two zebras like our fingerprints are alike, and yet they have a particular quality. So there's this sort of idea that I love, that we're going in cycles, we're circling all the time, and yet each path around the circle is unique somehow. This idea sort of from Buddhism that every step is the same, yet every step is unique. And one of the first sort of set of pieces I started to do was exploring some of these patterns. These are a series of pieces I call the Healing Series. And they're based on these types of patterns that are emergent. And I can talk about more about this, but I just want to go sort of quickly through this. In each of these pieces, the viewer walks across them, they wound the piece, and the piece heals itself. But one of the things that really fascinates me, or that really drew me to these pieces, is that when they heal themselves, the scar never completely closes. So you're left with that scar, and the piece is forever different from when it started. So it has kind of a memory of everybody who's walked across it. So again, remember those zebras that I showed, no two zebras are alike. So this piece will never exactly be the same, and yet it always has a quality, so you could recognize it for what it is. And I spent a lot of time playing with these kinds of patterns. This is a piece called Drift. Here, the patterns grow and they drift from right to left, and they squeeze from one sort of manifestation of the pattern to another, taking on the characteristics from one panel to the next. This is another larger exploration of that called Drift Wall. Again, these patterns are growing and moving, and they're drifting from one panel to the next. What's interesting in this particular one is that there are cameras embedded in the walls. So I decided to give the piece an awareness of its environment. And one of the key things about all my interactive works is I'm not really thinking of it from the user's point of view, from the visitor's point of view. It's more, I'm thinking about what would happen if I gave this piece an awareness of its environment, and how would it react. So in this case, each of these columns starts out exactly the same, but when you look at a particular column, it changes its behavior. So over time, this piece changes based on who has been in front of it and who has looked at it. So again, like the previous healing piece I showed you, it will forever be different based on its interactions. It has kind of a memory. And I started exploring this in 3 dimensions. At the time, my wife and I were trying to have a kid, and these, I call these embryos. They were kind of an exploration of control and loss of control. And what I did is each one of these is kind of a simulation, which is, let me just play that again, which is slightly different, randomized. And I randomly put in a 2-cell embryo and then just let it grow to whatever it grows to. And this was actually done for a show that Deborah commissioned my wife and I to be in. So I made 40,000 of these, and then I picked a bunch of them to 3D print. So these are 3D printed ceramics. I also have a small background in ceramics. I was kind of interested in playing with 3D printed ceramics to see how that felt. And the final results I really liked, but the process was kind of lacking. If any of you have done ceramics, it's quite a lovely material. And when you 3D print it, you kind of lose that tactile sensation, but the product was nice. I was happy with that. These sort of like luscious, sort of beautiful textures. So around that time also, I started, I was invited to be an artist in residence at Harvard Medical School, which was quite a unique opportunity. And I started to work with some of the model organisms that they use. These are organisms that they study for anything from development to drugs and stuff. These are these really sweet little frogs called Xenopus tropicalis from Southern Africa. And they have these quite large cells, so they use them to study development in embryos. And I started looking at them again to look at cycles, repetition, and in this case, struggle. So this is a frog kicking its way from childhood to adulthood and back. And when I show this piece, it's called Frog Time, I project it quite large so that the frog is almost human size. So you have to kind of confront it at his terms. The piece is a bit of software where the frog has an energy level. He kicks forward into the future. The higher his energy level, the faster he swims. There's a spotlight which is trying to keep pace with him. But the end result of all of this is that the piece never repeats, which is again sort of similar to this idea that it's cycling, it's repeating, but it's never exactly repeating. And you'll see it in a lot of my work. What I did here is I spent about 6 months studying these frogs, taking pictures of them, and I ended up making a lot of works out of it. And that tends to be a pattern with me. So I'll spend a lot of time on the underlying algorithms or the research, and then come up with a lot of pieces. And in each one of these, there's sort of frogs repeating, cycling, never quite doing the same thing again. While at the medical school, I also got interested in working with these microscopic worms called Caenorhabditis elegans. They are the most studied multicellular organism in the world. We know a lot about them. And I started to think about ways to connect to these organisms. Here is a single worm exploring a sculpture I made, sort of an avatar or representation of me in their world. I started to make lots and lots of sculptures for them to explore, including meditation paths. I was at the time started to really get into meditation, choices, and these are 6 different examples of sculptures I made for them. Kind of, I call them sculptures, but they're kind of environments for them to explore. And started to think also about, you know, these things are microscopic and I'm trying to have a relationship with them, but also I'm kind of, there's a power imbalance here, obviously. And there's a way where I am looking at them from this sort of third perspective. They tend to live in a 2-dimensional world in these areas. They do crawl up and down, but they tend to live in a 2-dimensional world, and I'm able to see them from this kind of third dimension. Here's just a video of them. Sort of watching them sort of cycle through and play around in one of my sculptures, creating these kind of interesting patterns. There's a lot of beauty in the negative space here. I don't know if any of you have ever read Flatland. It's a book, I think, from the 1800s, where it's a man kind of exploring what it would be like to live in 2 dimensions and what would happen if you were a 2-dimensional creature who suddenly got admitted to a 3-dimensional world. And it's a fascinating book if you haven't. And I started to, I came across these drawings from the daughter of a friend of mine. And they just looked like these little characters that were so motivated and yet kind of unhappy, pretending to be happy in a way. So I started to make these works called Exempla. This is a series of 4 of them. And in each one, these characters are moving in a 2-dimensional world. And from their perspective, they are going somewhere or doing something. From our perspective in a 3-dimensional world, it's very clear that they're just cycling. And of course, there are lots of very clear analogies to our own lives and our own cycles. So here they are flying around. Here's a piece called, I think this is called Erect. And similar to the worms or the birds, each one of these characters is just doing something very simple. In this case, it's trying to get above all the other characters with its own motivation. And in so doing, they create this tower. Here's another one where when you shine a spotlight on them, you allow them to actually break free of their 2-dimensional world and fly out for a minute and look back. Here's another one where their light goes on and they fly to the light, they expand, and then they're ejected, and they're paralyzed for a bit, in agony or ecstasy, we don't know. And in each of these, our role is kind of a capricious god. We get to affect their environment and mess up their kind of little world for a bit. I wanted to, I know I'm going very quickly, but I wanted to then show a little bit of the large-scale interactive work I've done. While I was at Harvard, I was given the opportunity to do a large-scale interactive installation. So I chose to do one at Memorial Hall. There's a little video here, and it's just easier for me to just show that rather than talk. there's another one that I did after that at the Speed Museum out in Kentucky, and I started to look less at model organisms and other creatures and abstractions, and started to look at using the human figure in my work. So that piece was actually, the seeds of that came from an experiment I did much earlier. My residency at McDowell, where I basically filmed myself and my wife doing kind of a meditative walk in a circle. And then I would project that back onto the wall, and people could basically join us in a walk. And the way it was set up, I would project it onto kind of architectural elements, so like pillars or doorways that were existent in the space. So it would be as if you were kind of walking with the space in a way. And then I started to, I don't have a lot of, experience with video production, and much more experience with animation and CG. And I started to work with sort of CG 3D animation, and looking at having this walking man and playing with ideas of, again, cycling. In this case, this is a very early piece, so a very early experiment, I should say. Having this man sort of walk and die and walk and die and keep doing that over and over again. This was an old experiment I did, which I recently came back to. My brother died recently, a couple of years ago, and in the Jewish tradition, coffins are generally very simple. So one of the rules is that the coffins have to be completely biodegradable, and there should be no metal in them. And traditionally, they're also made very simply, so out of like pine wood. So in the last couple of years, I've been learning a lot about woodworking and making these kind of miniature coffins. And the idea is to embed screens in them and have, say, a person cycling over and over again, say walking over and over again. And when you touch them, I've been doing a lot of work with capacitive sensors and ways to figure out when people touch them. The person will, the person on the screen will change their behavior. So you'll have kind of an intimate connection with them. At the same time, so just to give you a heads up, this is all new work. This is all the last couple years. I haven't shown a lot of this. And I started to collaborate with my wife. So this, just to be clear, this is a piece of my wife. My wife is a ceramic artist, and she started to make these really beautiful, organic, bulbous, amorphous pieces. And I love them. And she was storing some of them in my studio, and I decided to project onto them. So this is a man falling. And we both just fell in love with it and decided to make some pieces and see how that went. And the first piece we did, well, actually, this is just some experiments. One of the ideas was try to make these sort of objects, so that to hide the projectors and make it sort of an object you could just sort of plop on a desk. And one of the first pieces we made was called Perturbations. So these are her sculptures and my projections. These are three men, and they basically just idle, look around, and then every once in a while they kind of go to sleep for a little bit. There's kind of a daytime and nighttime cycle, and then they stand up again. And like all the pieces, there's sort of a general cycle, but they within that daytime, nighttime cycle, they can lie down whenever they want to. And again, the piece never repeats, but it sort of has a rhythm to it. And we started to do a lot of experiments. So right now, all you're going to see now are experiments from now on, no more finished pieces. So these are, this is a three-sided piece we were going to do called Big Top. That was sort of a little bit about absurdity. We started reading a lot of Ionesco and sort of plays from that area. A couple more pieces. Again, these characters are cycling over and over again, sort of getting nowhere. And when you touch the pieces or interact with them in some way, they change their behavior in a little bit. They might look at you, and they might stop what they're doing. They might grow, they might run off screen. We're not quite sure. This is a experiment with rotating the pieces, spin them around, and the projection would follow. So learning some stuff about optical sensors which detect rotation. Here is a very bright screen we bought, and my wife started to play with super thin porcelain. That's actually a porcelain sheet that's so thin you can see through it, and playing with making things out of focus. Because if it's not right up against the screen, it will be a little bit out of focus, but you can sort of make that part of the piece. These are a bunch of ideas for different cycling environments on different pieces. My wife got into mold making, so we started to play with molds and making repetitions, but slight modifications. And then to wind up, it's actually good timing. The latest thing she's been working on are these salt pots, where she basically makes these terracotta pieces that are porous. She fills them with water and salt, sometimes from the local environment. And then the salt can actually osmosis, I guess, diffuses through the piece and builds these beautiful sort of surface treatments. And the chemicals in the water also form these colors. And what's amazing about these is that if you leave them long enough, the salt will eventually fall off, and then you can put the salt back in the pot. So it forms kind of like, it sort of fits right in with my work. It has this kind of cycle again, where it's never quite the same. And so one of the things we've been working on is large wall scale installations, which unfortunately I have no pictures of, but imagine a wall scale installation of this. And each one will have these characters that are going to be sort of rising up, walking, sitting down. This is preliminary, so you can see the animation's a little messed up, but and sitting and standing and sitting and standing. And one of the things you'll notice is that I've started to work with different body types. So there are different kinds of women and men in here, and they will probably at some point die, and then a new one will come up. And your presence will probably not touching them, but perhaps looking at a particular one, it will then look at you in some way. So you'll have some kind of effect on these pieces as well. So this work is all preliminary. COVID got in the way of all this. We actually had a show coming up that, like many artists, a lot of the stuff got interrupted. So it's all on pause for now, but it's very exciting actually right now. So that's kind of what we're working on, where we're at. And that's a good time to stop actually. I think it's about 25 minutes. So that's where I'm at. So Deborah, I think you wanted to talk to me, but if anybody wants to ask questions about anything, I'm happy to take questions.
Yes. Hold on a second. Thank you, Brian, for sharing your work with us. And I want to just say something, which is to identify who your wife is, Natalie Andrew.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, Natalie Andrew.
Natalie Andrew, and the show that I gave Brian and Natalie was called Cryptogam, and it was really great to have the work in the gallery at Suffolk University Gallery. So I guess we've known each other in a variety of ways through Catalyst and also through the exhibition. So you touched on, I have a few prepared questions, and I'm happy for anyone who wants to join in, and Eduardo can take care of that. So you mentioned the pandemic. So, I've sort of mentioned this with everybody, how the whole world has been rocked due to the pandemic. Academic world, science, research worlds, the art world, like everything, everybody. And we've been affected financially, politically, socially, and psychologically. So the question is, what were some of the changes in your practice due to the pandemic? And so maybe you could just elaborate that,
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that also happened that's a little different for me is that my wife had also moved from Cambridge out to Holyoke. We bought some land and a barn and everything. It's almost exactly at the time the pandemic happened. We moved in August, but we bought the house like in April. So that's been a huge disruption of my practice, but a good one. And we lost a show. We had a big show planned in August. We both, particularly me, I tend to work much better with deadlines. So things just tend to kind of accumulate and accumulate, never finish. And that's sort of where things are at. So all that stuff I showed you, it's kind of like it needs that push to make them pieces, and that's probably not going to happen unless we have a show. So we bought a house, and we've been doing a lot of DIY stuff and fixing up the barn and fixing up the house and that. And I've just been enjoying getting back to working with my hands. So doing a lot of woodworking, a lot of electrical work, doing some gardening, that kind of stuff. And it's going to make its way back into my work, I'm sure, but there's nothing very clear right now. The other thing that's happened that I think is a little more existential is just, with the pandemic and with the election and with the state the country's in, and I'm 52 and my age as well, and also moving out here, there's just been a lot of questioning about what my work is and why I'm doing it, and those kinds of things that I think artists always ask themselves. But one of the things I think you'll notice in the work is that it's becoming a lot more intimate. So whereas my whole motivation was to I used to love making large room size installations, and I was very into this idea of getting people away from their computers and into a room with other people so they could interact with each other as much as with my piece. And that was as much of my motivation, like the interaction they had watching each other on my piece was very satisfying to me. And now I'm much more interested in kind of the small piece that you can have a personal relationship with. And I don't know if that's related to the pandemic, but more, maybe it's something I'm looking more for, this kind of intimate relationship with things in my life. So, I'm not sure. And then also there's a lot of hibernating that's going on. I mean, my wife bought me a onesie for my birthday, and I spent a lot of time in my onesie, you know, and I'm just like, I think one of the things that comes up, and I'm sure a lot of people relate to this, is just kind of accepting that's where we're at, is that it's hard to get a lot done. Not only are there not that many opportunities, but it's just, you know, that energy of being around people and being in relation to people in a show or in a cafe or in a whatever, just being around people just isn't there. And so you can fret about that or you can kind of accept it. And we've been trying to just accept it. So we have this very kind of hibernating routine. You know, we cook a lot, we sit around, we're in our onesies, we go for walks and kind of waiting to see what happens and trying to make ends meet with money. So that's where we're at.
Well, I'm sure many of us are in a similar mode, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in your kind of presentation, the last piece, which is a work in progress, but that the ceramic piece that's with salt and it's kind of degrading, and then, you know, you kind of bring it back to life. I find I'm really excited about that and what you're going to do with it in terms of, you know, projection and so on. It seems like and knowing Natalie's work a little bit, that it seems like that's going to really take you far. And I also, you know, it's interesting that, you know, I chose to describe, or quoting from your website, for the healing series. And I feel like your work is very much about that. You know, I mean, I think it's sort of embedded in your psyche as an artist. And, you know, I also found interesting the you know, pieces that are in progress of the, you know, the funeral pieces, you know, relating to your brother, which we don't have to know. I mean, you very graciously shared that information with us, but, you know, we don't need to know that when, you know, to interact with the piece. So I just feel like that you have this undercurrent of that anyway. And, you know, I've heard a lot of people describing or discussing that, you know, art is a way of healing us, you know, or it contributes to healing. So, you know, I think a lot of us, we don't really know what we're doing that, but we're doing that, you know, so that the viewer, the audience then projects themselves onto the piece in some way. And anyway, I think that happens, you know, when you're sort of trying to make community out of a large, you know, projected piece, or a more intimate relationship. So, and we were talking about, I mean, I'm glad you shared so much of your process. A couple of weeks ago when we were preparing, we were talking about how important process is in science and art. And, you know, you very generously showed us some of your process.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how I work. I'm just, it might be just my background as kind of an engineer, and there's this, I get curious about something, and then I just kind of jump in. And I what I've learned is that I tend to very early on have an idea of what I want to make, and then I never make that piece. That's like the anchor. And I've learned I make my best work is if I can let go of that original idea and be open to other things that come up. But I need that anchor to kind of pull me through. So the worms piece, for example, that was a really hard project, but very satisfying. But when I first started thinking about it, I had this idea that I would film the worms from their entire life cycle, from the egg to an adult to death, and then video stabilize it so you could kind of see a worm crawling to its death. And part of me still wants to make that piece, but that was kind of the anchor, and that's why I did all that work. But I never made that piece, and that's fine. You know, it's like that's how I do it. But it's kind of funny, like if making work is too easy for me, it doesn't feel right, which sounds stupid, but it's like it needs to be a struggle in order to feel kind of valid to me. I need to go through some kind of physical and mental like hardship for it to feel like I got something out of it. So sometimes there are residual pieces on the way, like for the frog pieces, there are a lot of pictures of frogs that I sometimes show, but they aren't as satisfying to me because they were just a picture. And I don't want to, like, I don't diss on anybody who takes pictures or photographs. It's just my particular process, like taking the pictures and then coming up with an algorithm to stabilize them and then making in between frames, the whole thing I had to do to make the animation, that was more satisfying to me because it involved like this difficult thing. I don't know, it's kind of I don't know, it's a bit of self-flagellation, I think. And I could maybe do a little bit less of that, but that tends to be my process.
I personally resonate with that. I feel like making art is creating roadblocks and really complicated, difficult problems that you must solve, that you now must solve. Like no one has asked you to do this, right? But you think that's how you're going to get there, and it is usually the way to get there. Like, it's sort of no fun if it's kind of easy, you know.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's and in a way, if I know what the piece is going to look like, and that's how it comes out, then what's the point? I don't really get it. Mm-hmm. You know, there has to be some discovery along the way. Yeah. You know, if I just have a concept, if it's something I can write down and you can envision exactly what it is, then I don't know what the point is. For me, it just seems like it needs a little bit of blood, sweat, and tears. And I feel like the audience, that will make its way to people who are going to see it. I have some confidence in that. Whether it's true or not, that's how I work. You know?
Yeah. Here's a question, and it may or may not resonate with you, but I was just wondering if the Catalyst conversation you had a couple years ago with Andrew Witt, if that had stayed with you. And just to explain to the attendees, that was a very special program. We were basically commissioned by an engineering firm to create a program in the podcast. So just curious if that...
Yeah, he did some really cool pieces. There was particularly one he did where he took a bunch of ceramics and he smashed them, and then he scanned all the pieces, and then he used an algorithm to fit them back together. But the algorithm wasn't trying to make the original pieces. It's here's a piece and here's another piece that fits. And he ended up with these beautiful kind of organic shapes that were kind of post-apocalyptic. I'm not sure, you know, they were just crazy, beautiful in their own way. And I just liked his process. I liked the way that his art was kind of in the algorithm, and whatever came out, he showed. It was like a little bit of a loss of control there. And also that, the sense that he was smashing ceramics and coming up with something even more beautiful, I really liked. Mm-hmm. I'm sure many of you know of that Japanese technique where they use gold leaf to fix pieces, broken pieces. And there are many artists who use broken ceramic shards, but he did it in this really beautiful way that was algorithmic, and it kind of, you could see his voice in it, but also the voice of the computer. Because I'm a programmer, and there's a look that a lot of generative art has, and it had a bit of that, but also had a bit of his voice, and I really like that. Yeah. In fact, when my wife and I, when we were looking at doing a show at the Harvard Ceramic Studio, we were thinking about including him and one other artist who he uses computers in art. But the way it worked out, we ended up deciding to do the whole show ourselves. But I really liked his work. Yeah.
Yeah, I did too. That's why I chose the two of you to talk to each other.
It's very clever work, I remember.
Yeah.
And beautiful,
I'm going to ask you one more question and then open it up to anyone who would like to comment or ask a question. And I will just disclose that this is something that my colleague Claudia Fix, who's doing a really great series called Sip and Chat, she asks this, which is in this, I'll paraphrase, everything has changed in this continued difficult moment. And is there perhaps a resulting silver lining for you?
I definitely think so. I mean, I sort of feel like, I was talking about hibernating, that there's something about cocooning which is really valuable. You can get really caught up in the patterns. And like, for me, being really honest, like there was a lot of ego involved in making art. Like I loved, there was a lot of stuff I felt was very beneficial, but I love showing in a major museum. I love getting written about. And I think that is that empty, it can be really empty. And I think that this pause has allowed me to see that a little more and see what's really, kind of more the healthy motivations. It's really easy to get on that kind of cycle. You know, you have a show and then you post about it, and then you kind of get in this kind of snowball, and it's treadmill, I guess. That's a good analogy. And you don't step off of it, and you fear that if you step off of it, that you won't get on it. And now a lot of us have been forced to step off of it, and I think that can be really healthy. And I'm not saying it's all easy. I've gone through depression and anxiety and stuff, but there's a kind of wiser part of me that sees that this is a good moment for me and probably for some other people. And coinciding with this move we've made, we've kind of stepped away from Cambridge, which I don't know where our audience is, but Cambridge is, is a very high striving place. And getting away from that has also been kind of healthy and has its negatives, but it's nice to have that new perspective of being in a more rural place where everything's a little bit quieter and a little bit slower. So yeah, I think there's definitely a silver lining.
That is good to hear. Maybe that's an inspiration for other people as well. So maybe, Eduardo, do you want to take over and see about questions and comments?
Yes, we already have a few questions here.
Great.
So the first one is from Diane, and her questions are, where was the August show planned to be held?
So that was at the Harvard Ceramic Studio. So the complete piece I showed you, the only complete piece called Perturbations, with the 3 men. So that was shown at Harvard Ceramic Studio. So I threw there for a while. My wife has been there for a long time. She was a artist in residence there. She had a studio there and everything. And we had a piece there in a group show. And it was really interesting because they tended to be pretty traditional, but they have a new director there. Kathy King is amazing. He's very open to a lot of stuff, and she let us put this piece in, and we got a nice feedback that she offered us a full show in August, the whole gallery, I mean, and then of course that just got canned. So.
Okay, we have another question. What did you use for that tabletop projector?
It's a really small Optima. It's this small, it's teeny. I love it. It's about 500 lumens. Just look up Optima micro projector, I think. And what I do is I hide it inside the table and through a series of mirrors. It's just a very small mirror projecting out on top. So that's all you see. The other thing we're doing is we're putting, like I said, screens inside. We're putting some projectors actually in the pots. So we might have 2 pots that are projecting onto each other. I'm looking at lasers, and then some projectors will actually be outside, kind of projecting on all kinds of things we're trying, just to kind of get away from the tech and have it just be like a beautiful object that, one of the key things is that when the projector's off, we want the piece to stand on its own. And my wife's work does, but we don't want there to be all this sort of tech around. So that's kind of one of the constraints we put on ourselves.
Okay, we have another question. Have you invented a way to see your new works in a socially distanced, safe environment?
I haven't, and it's so anathema to my work right now. I'm not sure how I would do that. I've never really connected to virtual works, or I haven't, unfortunately. It's something to think about. It really is, but it's just, for me, it's about being present with the work. Like my dad, he's lovely. He keeps sending me these virtual walkthroughs of the Met, and I just never go. They just, it just doesn't work for me to see paintings on my computer. So I don't know how I would do that. It's a great question, but I haven't. So.
Okay, just to remind, we have another question now here. Could your work be installed in a museum house so people can walk room to room?
In a museum house, what does that mean? It can be installed in a house, certainly. The problem with a lot of this work is that the bigger work is that it's quite difficult to put up and maintain, and it can be quite expensive also with all the equipment. And that's part of another reason I'm enjoying this work I'm doing with my wife, is that it's small and contained, and maybe you can just put it in your room, you know, just like you would a sculpture, whereas the other work is quite difficult. I think it's neat. Yeah, I don't see why it couldn't be installed in any of those places. I mean, I don't really know the Orchard House or the Pierce House, but one of the things I love doing is doing pieces, site-specific pieces. So, like the Speed Museum, doing it in that period room. If I were to do a piece for a house, like a historic house, I would love to do something that is somehow uses the history or the sort of like the context of that house in the piece.
Brian, I just want to chime in here. I think that's a great idea to, because there'd be that kind of like maybe almost subtlety where like, oh, it's a vase on a table, but then it's also, a piece that you have, a projection or like a little, camera inside or whatever. I think that would be a really interesting, kind of juxtaposition of your work. And
yeah. So one of the things that we're doing, we've been planning on doing, is having a real variety of work. So we had this, a couple large wall installations that are big, kind of like what I've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And then these smaller sculptural pieces that are projectors, and then a lot of just just ceramics only, where we would use the themes and the ideas behind the pieces, but in I don't want to say traditional ceramics, but traditional ceramics, using decals and screen prints and things like that. And even just lights with, we had some pieces that are using shadows and just lights, really low tech. So I have a variety of pieces and stretches, kind of interesting for us, but also we're thinking about how to sell these pieces. And, there's two motivations here. One is, to earn a living and sell the pieces. But the other one is that it is difficult when my pieces are so expensive that only museums can sell them. And it's nice to be able to sell a piece to, for under $1,000 that someone can afford to put in their house. And my wife makes these beautiful lamps. And I've been making the basis for them. And the fact that we can give those or sell those to friends and family has been really great. It just feels lovely to be able to give it to people. We tend to share with friends quite a bit. We have a lot of our friends work here and vice versa. And I haven't been able to be a part of that, and now I can. And that's great. I love that.
Okay, and we have another question. Are you currently selling work? If so, where can we find them?
Yeah, so I'm not. My wife is, but I'm not. But we will. Hopefully, in the next year or so, we'll have some stuff. Let me say that again. I am selling work through. I have a gallery, Ron Feldman Fine Arts in New York, but it's all like the big installation stuff. If you want something smaller, you'll have to wait a bit. But if you're a museum or you've got a big house and a big budget, then yes, send me a line. And I'll be happy to sell you something.
Maybe I want to chime in here. Eduardo, is there another question?
There was just a comment from Diane. She just wants to share that there have been movie and artwork projections onto icebergs. Perhaps you could replace the ceramics with large ice blocks for a winter outdoor installation.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And then have it change as the ice melts even. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
Yeah, the idea of the material changing and then the projection sort of somehow feeding into or fitting on that, I think would be lovely. Even like directing where people touch maybe so that area changes more. Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for the idea.
I just want to mention how interesting I find your, what you call DIY, making things with your hands, because your background is so strong in, computer engineering, which has to do with machines, and that it made me just thinking about what I had said earlier, that you use technology to make poetry. And I think that's kind of apt, that you're not like, as if it's poetry, but it's, physically it's poetry. And you use technology, not for its own sake at all, but to get to this other, to the other more complicated aspects of you know, of art.
I've
Yeah.
since the beginning, I've always had a love-hate relationship with computers. Like they're great in some ways, but I love how flexible they are. But I find them deeply unsatisfying in the kind of what's the word, like embodied way, like touching them or holding them, or you know, they're just very. It's just this. You know, you're in this virtual world all the time, and then so when I was in my early 20s, I basically quit my job and started taking ceramics. And for about 2 years, it's all I did, and I drew, and it just was so much more satisfying. But I couldn't make a living at it, and there was still a draw of computers. It's not like it's, you know, I hate them, but so I think I've always tried to bring some of that sensibility into my work. And part of what's so exciting about doing this work now is getting back to that objects, you know, actual objects, and I might make some of them, certainly I'll make some of the have a part of the mold making, and it's just more satisfying. Don't know how to say it, you know. So yeah.
We are getting close to the end of our program. If anyone has anything else, questions or thoughts?
Somebody said on here that they were hoping my wife should be here. Should I just bring her up, see if she wants to come say hello?
Sure. We can say hello to Natalie.
Nat, come say hello. Seems only fair since
She has been mentioned a lot.
hopefully she's not wearing her onesie.
Not today. Hello.
Hello, Natalie. How are you?
Very well. How are you?
I'm good. We have just spent a wonderful hour talking with Brian, and your name has come up a lot, and he showed some of your recent collaborative pieces. So I just wanted our attendees, or Brian wanted our attendees to know who you were.
Oh,
So
yeah,
there you are.
and somebody asked about it. I seen only fair.
Another scientist, equal parts scientist and artist, correct?
Yes, that's right. Biologist and
Yeah.
and artist.
Yeah. So
I don't know. I can't see anybody, but
yeah. Anyway,
You're up
we
there
can
somewhere.
see you. So Brian, that's actually a good place to end. And I want to thank you so much for spending time with us, and it was great talking with you. And thanks to all you attendees for your thoughts and questions. I want to just say we're working on our upcoming spring program, so stay tuned. You can join our mailing list to receive announcements, and check out our website, catalystconversations.org, where you can experience our past programs and podcasts, including the one that I mentioned that Brian did with Andrew Witt. So thanks again for coming, and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. It was really great.
Bye.
Wish I could see you all, but I'll trust you're there.
Goodbye, and thank you again, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.